Hey, juniors. So this is it. It's our last few chapters in the Inferno. And let me just say, I know this book isn't probably on your top three favorite novels of all time, and I get that. There are times when I feel like I really enjoy this book. It did not necessarily come my first time through. It's one of those books I'm kind of glad I teach because I don't know that I would read it as carefully on my own if I weren't sort of tasked to do it. But I have seen that there's a lot there, and there's just a bunch of treasures buried in different places. And on reading and rereading, I've seen a lot of this. So I'm hoping today, with a couple of the comments I make, to show you just some sense of why I think people are drawn to this book over and over and again. I mean, it's been translated dozens of times into English, and it is still fascinating the minds of people. And people are still making film adaptations of it, new film adaptations, new interesting spins on it. It inspires all kinds of art all the way into the modern era. There's something mysteriously attractive about this book to the world. I think I'm getting a glimpse of why, and I understand it if at this point you're kind of like, I don't think I know. Some of you do. I know Gracie said you said that this book was really one of your favorites, so that's great. There's always a few juniors who always say this is my favorite book of the year, and I think that's great. So let's get going. This is gonna be a little longer. It's our last one, so buckle down. Maybe closer to 10 minutes here. I'll still try to move at a good pace. In Canto 31, you get this interesting line at the top of page 319. If you've got your books, line 22 following, he says, because you race ahead too great a distance through the darkness, imagination tangles you in knots. You see it well when you've arrived, how much your senses, you'll see it well when you've arrived, how much your senses have deceived you from afar. Now he's speaking of what looks like towers off in the distance, right? There's the tower of my deodorant. He sees these towers and he says they're not towers, they're giants, right? But Dante can't see. So it's a quote like that. I'm telling you, it's a quote like that stops some people in their tracks. What's he trying to say about my senses? What's he trying to tell us as a reader? He's saying, like, look, you, the living, are still miles and miles away from the end, from either heaven or hell. Your senses see it only kind of vaguely. You look at the giants and you think they're towers. You can't imagine, you and I can't imagine, we're the living, we can't imagine heaven or hell. Dante says, hold on, I'm going to try and show you. I'm going to try to show you what's in store, to give you some sense of what is ahead, to motivate you, hopefully, to follow the Lord all the more closely. A couple interesting notes as we move through. We've got line 77. We've got the character Nimrod, who's actually mentioned in Genesis. So just another interesting kind of snapshot view of Dante's kind of understanding of the Bible. He sees Nimrod, who was a figure in the Old Testament, possibly connected with Babel, as being a giant, one of the giants that the Greeks talked about, having waged war against the gods. So again, synthesizing some Greek myth here with possibly Tower of Babel story from Genesis. And the themes are similar, frankly. The mankind was gaining too much power. They were too unified, and the Lord came down and confused the languages and stopped the tower, in the same way that the gods took the giants and kind of put them in Tartarus, or Dante would say in the Inferno. In both cases, an attempt by the deity to stop and suppress the growth of power on the earth. Of course, the giants are also there for their rebellion against Jove, or Zeus, or Jupiter, however you'd like to say it, which again kind of raises that same issue we've been thinking through here. Why does Dante have people who committed sins against a pagan god down here in the Inferno, right? Okay, and then lastly, I would say, you've probably already noticed this, but we haven't said anything about it. Dante is constantly bartering with the inhabitants of hell, offering them fame. I'll tell your story in this book. I'll tell your story if you'll tell me kind of who you are and why you're down here, basically satisfy my curiosity. Dante is on a learning mission. He's there to gather the information, and he has to kind of get it out of the inhabitants of hell. fame? Why does he, it's kind of interesting. Like, why does he keep doing that? And it occurred to me, think about this. It occurred to me that it's the only currency of the damned. It's the only thing they could possibly find any value in. There's no hope, there's no relief, but the thought that possibly, while the history of the world still rolls on, their name won't be totally erased. It's the only thing that matters to someone in that place. And in a way, just a profound occurrence to me, in a way, by offering fame to the damned, Dante is showing us just how paltry it is, how worthless really it is. This is what the inhabitants of hell really care about. They want to be known up above. They want their name to live on. And so it's a kind of currency, If you're in hell, it's the only thing of any value. I thought that was really fascinating to me. Okay, so moving into Canto 32 now. Okay, we're still kind of down in the very bottom level. This is the ninth circle. Different regions here. You've got, Cani, named after Cain. You've got Antenor, Ptolemaea. These are all names of, famous kind of old legendary figures or biblical figures in the case of Canaan. Now, you'll notice that in 32, Dante is getting kind of old, right? I mean, he's like kind of growing up. And I noticed right here on line 44, he just jumps right out and starts talking to people. He doesn't even ask Virgil anymore for help. He doesn't ask if he can pause. He's like, I'm talking. He wants to know. So Dante's getting very bold. That boldness, reaches an extra height later in 97, where he basically looks down at the guy, says, tell me who you are and I'll tell your story above. And the guy's like, no thanks, I'm a traitor, I don't want anybody to know my story, you can just get out of here. And Dante grabs the guy by the hair and pulls his head back and says, I'll pull every hair out of your skull if you don't tell me. And so we whoa, who is this? This is the guy that was kind of fainting in fear outside the walls of Dis. Here he is in the bottom circle of Inferno, grabbing inhabitants by the hair, and later he sees one who's got his eyes frozen shut, and he promises him. He says, I'll help you out if you tell me. And the guy tells him, and he just walks away. And he says, to be villainous to a person like this was courtesy. Everything we see is getting turned over here in hell. We'll go more on that later. Now, there's a really interesting moment. You gotta keep your eyes open for these little moments. But there's a moment here. First of all, you'll notice that Mordred is down here, by the way. We don't see him directly, but he's mentioned, he's referenced. In line 52, when he's trying to talk to these people, one of them speaks out to Dante and says, what mirror are you staring at in us? You see? What mirror are you staring at in us? There's my mirror. He's like, I think there's a little bit of a hint there. It's these little nuggets. But I think it's Dante maybe saying, don't forget, you could be seeing yourself down here. This could be you. Don't ever let it kind of just pass off that I'm passing through hell. Oh, no threat to me, no danger to me. No, it's a danger. It's a danger. This could be your mirror, right? So now in 32 is where we start to really see what I would call the antichrist, of this place. It's not just the antichrist, it's the anti-heaven. It's the diametric opposite of the dwelling of God. And you're going to see a number of things that are kind of turned on their heads, versions of heaven, versions of Christ, but they've been flipped and inverted so that they are the opposite. And one of those you'll see is all the eating. People are gnawing on each other's heads. And then when you get to the bottom, you find Dis, which is what he calls Satan. You find Dis actually gnawing on Judas and Brutus and Cassius. And he's gnawing on these characters. And there's all this eating. So does that bring anything to mind? Yeah, Jesus says, at the Last Supper, this is my flesh, this is my blood. Unless you eat my body and eat my blood, you have no part, right? So there's this is the Eucharistic feast, but turned on its head. It's consuming, destroying, right? When we eat of Christ, we become alive. You could even say that when we are consumed by God, when we are lost in Him, we find our life. But down here in hell, the consuming and the destructive nature of this eating is meant to be a kind of mirror image of the opposite, a dark, shadowy image of the Eucharistic feast that is celebrated up in heaven, the victory of God over sin. Right? Okay. Now, in Canto 33, we have easily one of the most famous characters from this story. His name is Ugolino. Okay, Ugolino. You should definitely look up Ugolino sculptures on Google, because there is a famous sculptor. Holy cow, name just totally slipped my brain. Anyway, we have one of his sculptures at the Birmingham Museum of Art. He's one of my favorites. He's really great. He did the Thinker. The Thinker actually is supposed to look like Dante. Really deeply inspired by Dante, the sculptor was. How is it? Oh man, I wish I could pause this and I could tell you right away, but I can't think of it right. It'll come to me. Don't worry. Let's just forget about it. Ugolino sculpture. You'll find it. Trust me. It's like really kind of haunting and scary. And the story of Ugolino is just awful. It's just awful. And his sin isn't even a big deal. Like, he doesn't even talk much about his sin. Really, the thing he talks about is how he was punished for his sin. And I think Dante is giving us a vision here, a vision of just how awful this all is. And he shows us, again, a kind of inversion. You have a man who committed treachery, but then he's locked in a tower with his children, okay? No food, no drink, just to starve to death with his children there. And like having to watch them die slowly, of course, is just brutal, awful. I mean, I can't imagine it. If I could imagine it, it would drive me insane. But what I did notice, okay, is that the son says to the father, okay, when he sees that the father is super hungry, so hungry that the father says, I bit my knuckle. The son thought I was eating my own knuckle because I was so hungry. Then one of Ugolino's sons comes up and says, take my flesh. See? Again. And then when Dante is thinking about it later, line 88, he says, yeah, I mean, Ugolino did something awful, but why did he have to bear this cross? Why did you nail him to this cross? So clearly so much imagery going on here at the bottom, a reversal, a diametric opposition of everything glorious and beautiful about the gospel and heaven. We first get the idea that there's a little wind in hell. Now, it's called the Inferno, which makes you think flames, right? But the truth is, the further you get away from the beautiful light and burning fire of God's Empyrean, okay, the colder it gets, of course. You know, I mean, yeah, there's places where there's burning and there's sulfur and stuff. But if you are as far as you can get away from the source of light and life, it is going to be dark and going to be cold. And that's what it's like at the very pit of hell. And it's partly that way because the wings of Dis, that's Satan, the fallen angel, kind of keep moving like the air conditioning across the, you know, across the ocean of Cocytus, the sea of hell. Now, when we get to the last thing, you see the ultimate inversion, because when you find Dis, he is embedded in the ice and he has 3 faces and 6 eyes, 3 mouths. Each mouth holds one of the worst traitors of all time, Judas Iscariot and Brutus. I don't understand how they're together, but the point is, they're all traitors. And here's what makes their sin so awful, okay? It is the sin of treachery, a guy like Judas. It is the opposite of Christ's sacrificial love. Watch. A traitor, okay, a traitor harms a friend for personal gain. Christ, love himself, sacrificed himself, allowed himself harm for the gain of his enemies, right? So, whereas a traitor harms a friend to gain or to benefit themselves, Christ allowed himself to be harmed to benefit those who were still his enemies. And you see how that is why we are at the very bottom. We are at the bottom. This is as far as you can get away. This is the root heart of evil in mankind, to essentially become the Antichrist, to use love, to use reason, will, and even love, in this case, to commit this grievous act of sin. It's the full human turned to evil. that's kind of like how we see this thing here. So that's it. There's some other interesting stuff going on in here. For example, according to Dante, when Satan fell from the sky, the land had originally been kind of gathered all around the earth, but when he fell, it all got pushed to the northern hemisphere. You'll also notice that when Dante's climbing out, he's like, wait a minute, why is this upside down? And Virgil's gonna be like, this isn't upside down. You just crossed the center of the earth. And you went from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, and now everything's upside down. You're being pulled this way, and Dis or Satan is being pulled this way. And of course there's like exactly 6 lines that allows him to go from the center of the earth all the way to the edge of the southern hemisphere, where he's going to meet Mount Purgatory, and go on to the next stage. Well, I hope that at some degree you've seen some of the beauty of this book. You've seen some of the mystery and some of the kind of compelling imagery that has drawn people to it. If nothing else, you can definitely now say, I've read Dante. That's a mark of credibility, right? Well, I hope again to get next week to get back into talking a little bit. We're going to talk about book distribution, a final kind of review assessment on the Inferno. But for now, just go off and enjoy some reading. Bye, guys.